For a huge chunk of South Park's history, I think it would be safe to say that Stan and Kyle were seen as the two primary main characters of the four boys. Cartman and Kenny might have been more iconic, but Stan and Kyle were the most normal, the most morally sound, and served as pseudo-stand-ins for Matt and Trey themselves. They even pointedly resemble Matt and Trey in their middle age, as seen in the COVID specials. But one of Stan and Kyle's most defining traits was the fact that they are best friends.
You can't just hang out with your buddy Kyle all the time. People think you guys are, funny.
That said, is that really still the case? A lot has changed over the years in South Park. Are Stan and Kyle as close as they always were, or is it clear that their broship is on the decline? Join me today as we answer the ever-pressing question. Are Stan and Kyle still best friends? I think it's fair to say that at a certain point, Stan and Kyle both started taking each other for granted. And I actually think we're all guilty of taking certain things for granted in our lives. One thing that I stopped taking for granted is a good night's sleep. I mean, if we spend 1/3 of our lives in bed, why should I settle for anything but the best in a mattress? And that is where today's video sponsor, Helix Sleep, comes in. I'm gonna be honest, as I get older, the more difficulty I'm having sleeping soundly through the entire night, which in turn affects my mood and energy the next day. And I didn't really realize until recently that my mattress probably has a lot to do with that. Enter Helix Sleep. The Helix Sleep quiz actually allows you to fine-tune exactly what you need personally in a mattress based on your sleep requirements. I am a side sleeper who tosses and turns a lot. I like a medium firm mattress. I usually sleep hot, and so they recommended the Helix Midnight. I actually upgraded that to the Helix Midnight Luxe, which is a little bit nicer. That model has actually been ranked the best overall mattress by both Forbes and Wired, and now suddenly I am sleeping soundly through the night again. Helix Sleep also delivers straight to your door, and the mattress expands very quickly and conveniently once you've unpacked it. So quickly that I actually struggled to get it all on camera here. It was kind of funny. Maybe best of all, Helix actually offers a 120-night sleep trial and a limited lifetime warranty. That means you can test out a luxury mattress for almost 4 entire months to know if it's right for you. Huge thanks to Helix Sleep for sponsoring this video. Please click the link in the description of this video, take advantage of their Labor Day sale, and save up to 30% on select mattresses. Check out Helix Sleep today.
Kyle's my best friend in the whole world.
As I said, South Park quickly establishes Stan and Kyle as best friends early on, usually seen as a duo in the group, sharing very similar worldviews on most things, serving as the primary moral compasses among the boys. Of course, they were still kids who got into trouble and ripped on each other, but compared to Kenny serving as the comedic slapstick and Cartman serving as the spoiled bully, Stan and Kyle were the most normal.
That's what's so funny about Cartman's stuff. He's always like, Kyle's just like Stan. They're just the same kid. It's like, that's the joke, is there's nothing there.
They even sing the same line in the opening theme, whereas Cartman and Kenny get their own sections. And of course, we can't forget about Stan and Kyle always being in sync for what is arguably South Park's most famous recurring gag from the classic era.
Oh my god, they killed Kenny! You bastards!
In the early days, a common episode format would often find Stan and Kyle as the primary characters for the A-plot, teaming up to solve a mystery or deal with the major conflict of the episode after Kenny dies and Cartman goes off to do his own thing. They were portrayed as the heroes of the series for a long time, and the two are shown to consistently have each other's backs even under ridiculous circumstances. We see just how far their friendship will go in Cherokee hair tampons. Kyle gets sick with serious kidney problems, needing a transplant. Sheila and the rest of the town are sold on new age medicine that isn't working, meaning Kyle is basically on the brink of death. Stan does everything in his power to make sure Kyle is safe.
I'll give Kyle my kidney, even if it hurts a whole lot, I don't care.
Of course, the only kid with the actual same blood type as Kyle ends up being Cartman, who obviously won't help him. Stan does end up tricking Cartman into giving up his kidney for Kyle, which would be pretty messed up if it were anyone but Cartman.
Dude, you're my best friend. I don't want you to die until I do.
We see a similar health-related conflict in Cartman Land, where Kyle gets a pretty bad case of hemorrhoids. Meanwhile, Cartman buys a theme park with his grandmother's inheritance with the express purpose of keeping the place all to himself. This injustice sends Kyle into a depressive spiral that ends up exacerbating his ass problems. The hemorrhoids end up getting infected, largely due to Kyle losing all faith that the world is in any way good or just. This motivates Stan to try and break into Cartman Land, not to get in himself, but to try and restore Kyle's hope. Kyle's infection reaches a life-threatening level, but just as it does, Cartman loses everything, prompting Stan to storm to the hospital and demand that they wheel Kyle out to the theme park to see Cartman suffer, which of course immediately restores his will to live. So technically, twice now, Stan has saved Kyle's life. Even beyond the life-threatening stuff, there are so many examples across the first half of the show where Stan goes far out of his way just to support Kyle. In Smug Alert, Gerald forces the Broflovskis to move to San Francisco where they can be among like-minded, energy-conscious people that drive hybrid cars. So in an effort to bring Kyle back to South Park, Stan writes a corny viral song prompting people to drive hybrids, hoping Kyle's dad might change his mind. In the episode The List, after Kyle is rated the ugliest boy in class by the girls, Stan tries to get the list reconsidered so that he can get Kyle out of yet another spiral. Now, you may have noticed that it's been mostly Stan saving Kyle so far, and there's a reason for that. It turns out Stan and Kyle aren't necessarily as identical as they initially seemed to be.
Nothing's real. Reality and oh god!
I would give a little bit of pushback to Matt Stone's statement that Kyle is just Stan but Jewish. Sure, Stan and Kyle are mostly similar, especially early on, but there are some distinct differences that set them apart, even towards the very beginning of the series. Kyle is a bit more existential than Stan. His crises usually involve unhealthy ruminations and thought loops, as we saw in Cartman Land and The List. Maybe the most prominent example of Kyle's existential dread is in the episode The Tooth Fairy's Tath 2000, where upon learning that the Tooth Fairy isn't real, Kyle starts to question everything.
Oh my god, what if I'm not real?
Kyle is like this the entire episode until it culminates in a pretty crazy climax. As he's freaking out, Kyle literally fades away and then proceeds to bend all of reality around him. I bring this up because this level of existentialism from Kyle has led him to be misled on multiple occasions, to the point where even Stan reaches his breaking point. We'll talk about Stan and Kyle's many conflicts in a bit, but one of their earliest riffs was in Super Best Friends, when the boys get swept up in a cult spearheaded by David Blaine. Stan senses something is up with the whole thing pretty quickly and bails, but ultimately Kyle is completely immersed in it, brainwashed into thinking he's been unhappy his whole life. When Stan plans his escape, Kyle is the main one he tries to convince to go with him. But at this point, Kyle is in way too deep.
This is what I believe in now, Stan. And if you can't respect that, then I guess we're not best friends anymore.
Even after the statement from Kyle, Stan does not give up right away, enlisting the Super Best Friends to try and put a stop to David Blaine's cult. Kyle does come to his senses on his own here, but then the cult nearly drowns him. Fortunately, the Super Best Friends come through, so that's 3 times Stan has saved Kyle's life. Kyle would go on to be misled by yet another magical douchey celebrity in Biggest Douche in the Universe. Kyle takes John Edwards' alleged psychic communication with his grandma to heart, believing she's always watching him, which eventually leads him to attend an all-Jewish school called Juilliard in New York. Stan goes straight to John Edwards to try and get him to reverse what he'd done. When that doesn't work, he gets sucked into learning the trick of cold reading to try and convince Kyle, and everyone else really, that John Edwards is full of shit and, well, a huge douche. This is an instance where Stan actually does throw his hands up, exhausted by the whole affair.
Fine, I give up. You want to stay in New York, then go ahead.
Before getting sucked back into the plot and inadvertently getting through to Kyle in the end. Obviously, we see that Stan will go to great lengths to help Kyle, but if Kyle doesn't want to save himself, there's only so much he's willing to put up with. The same can be said on Kyle's end as well. In Raisins, the roles are reversed a bit, where Stan is wallowing in sadness after Wendy dumps him for Tolkien. Yeah, that'll do it for sure. Kyle leads the other boys to try and help Stan snap out of it to no avail, and Kyle is ironically the one who gives Stan the idea to hang out with the goth kids, although he was being facetious when he suggested it. By this point, Kyle is already fed up, and it had only been 4 days. Like, damn dude, give the boy some time to grieve. Kyle didn't actually think Stan was going to immerse himself as a full-fledged goth, so when he catches him hanging with the goth kids at the diner, he urges him again to try and snap out of it. When Stan doesn't budge, Kyle too throws his hands up.
Fine, that's it. I give up. Have fun being miserable.
A bit of foreshadowing here for sure. Stan is eventually talked out of his goth phase by Butter's iconic speech, but Kyle and the crew welcome him back with open arms. Kyle, of course, still had Stan's back on plenty of other occasions too. He went on that Da Vinci Code adventure to help Stan in Fantastic Easter Special, used his iPad to FaceTime Stan so that he wouldn't miss out on trick-or-treating, and tons of other instances as well. But it's clear Stan's had to come to Kyle's aid more often, and I think Kyle's inherent sensitivity and pattern of overthinking are a core reason reason for why this is. Stan, on the other hand, is a little more logical and can come across a bit brazen at times, with his primary weakness being Wendy.
Gonna be okay, dude? I'm here for you.
Hi, Stan. Ready to go see another movie?
Okay.
Of course, this dichotomy between Stan and Kyle isn't nearly as exaggerated as it is with, say, Tweek and Craig, and it certainly didn't become a major focal point of their characters until several seasons deep. Kyle definitely used to be a bit more of an asshole than he currently is, and Stan used to be a bit more of a softie than he currently is. But the seeds of their differences have been planted for a long time, which seems to have led Matt and Trey to naturally build episodes around this dynamic more as time went on, consciously or subconsciously. Kyle being the more sensitive one tracks, given his overbearing mother, as well as the fact that he's consistently the odd one out of the friend group, which leads to a lot of inner turmoil and insecurities for him. It's baked into the show's earliest episodes, which is exactly why Kyle is the one who keeps grabbing onto anything that makes him feel like he belongs. In the very first Christmas special, all the way back in season 1, Kyle laments not feeling included during Christmas time because he's Jewish. In Chin Pokemon, he is consistently behind the trend the entire episode. In Bigger, Longer, and Uncut, while Kyle isn't exactly singled out, it's his mother that's leading the charge against Canada and causing the major conflict of the story in the first place. As badly as he wants to stand up to his mother, he's afraid. In South Park is Gay, he's out of the loop on the metrosexual fad as well. He tries to fit in for a while, but eventually gives up and decides to not conform to the new standard. This causes yet another brief rift between Kyle and Stan, where Stan reluctantly chooses to abandon Kyle in order to keep the boys' group as gay as possible. After the fad dies down, the boys invite Kyle back to play football with them like nothing ever happened. However, Kyle expresses how hurt he was that his best friends just turned their back on him and treated him like garbage. Stan and Cartman harshly tell him to stop complaining and just join him in the game of football. Kyle almost doesn't go along with it, but caves in the end. As mean as this was, it is kinda just how the boys show affection. Not at all healthy in this instance, but it is what it is. In It's Christmas Time in Canada, Ike's birth parents take Ike back to Canada, and Kyle pleads with the boys to help him go to Canada himself to speak with the Prime Minister to get his brother back. None of the boys are down for it, focused more on the festivities of Christmas, and in Stan's case, having a Christmas adventure. The boys only agree to help Kyle after the whole town decides not to buy presents that year, opting instead to give money to the Broflovskis in their time of need. Even after the boys succeed, Stan still laments not having a Christmas adventure. As mentioned earlier, we also see Kyle ostracized along with the other ugly kids in the list. Much later on, he's late to yet another fad in Help My Teenager Hates Me, when he's the last one of the boys to get an airsoft gun. He's left out yet again in Worldwide Privacy Tour, where Ike keeps hogging the computer to watch the Canadian Queen's funeral on repeat, preventing Kyle from being able to join the boys in online gaming. He becomes even more of a pariah after the Prince of Canada and his wife pester him with their privacy protests. It becomes all Kyle talks about, and the boys start distancing themselves as a result. Kyle tries embracing brand management for a while to help him cope, but by the end, he realizes becoming a brand ultimately isn't for him, and I guess the things with the boys resolve naturally. So ultimately, no, Kyle is not just Stan but Jewish. Arguably, he never really was. Very similar, yes, but operating under very different circumstances. Kyle is the kid who spent his whole life on the outside looking in, and that's precisely what makes him such an easy mark for anyone who offers him a place to belong. And pointedly, Stan doesn't really stick up for Kyle in these moments. He hesitates more than the others, but still decides to go with the group for the most part, rather than stick by his best friend. I'm not sure if you've noticed, but almost every example we've discussed so far has had some sort of middleman. David Blaine, John Edwards, the Goth Kids, Crab People. It's always some outside force. So what happens when it's just Stan and Kyle going head to head?
Stan! What the fuck?
Stan and Kyle being best friends ironically sets them up for conflict more so than most other characters. Them being so close enhances the drama whenever they're on the outs. So it's happened more than you would think. In fact, there are probably more episodes strictly dedicated to them having a falling out compared to episodes strictly dedicated to them being besties. Their very first fight takes place during season 2's finale, Prehistoric Iceman. Stan and Kyle discover a man frozen in ice. They quickly start fighting over what to name him and can't agree on who found him first. Dr. Mephisto gets a hold of him and it becomes a whole media whirlwind, but instead of enjoying the glory of discovery together, Stan and Kyle bicker the entire time.
Well, I fell down down this ice cavern, and I saw this block of ice, so I told my friend Laurel.
The whole joke is that he's not prehistoric at all, but a guy who's only been frozen for like less than 3 years. Yet the entire town treats him like some sort of ancient missing link in human evolution. Stan and Kyle both do their best to look after Steve, or Gorak, depending on whose side you're on, but it gets to a point where they have a full-on friendship breakup, both opting instead to make Cartman their respective best friend. Desperate times. They won't even finish the catchphrase anymore.
Oh my God! They killed Kenny! What? I'm not talking to you.
They both do their best to rescue Larry. Oh yeah, that was the Iceman's real name, Larry. But they can't stop arguing, and they finally agree to actually fight it out physically.
Okay, first one to die loses. Okay. Okay.
Though even while fighting, they're both very much dedicated to getting Larry safely to Des Moines, where he can live in peace, even pausing mid-fight to help him. After Larry gets away and pesters them both with cheesy speeches about friendship, Stan and Kyle come to their senses and make up. This being Stan and Kyle's first real rift, you can see how much they still care about each other. Their fight was the epitome of respectful. Like, it felt like they were fighting because they felt they had to, not because they truly wanted to deep down.
Ow! Ow! What's my code, dude? Oh.
The episode Kenny Dies pits Stan and Kyle against each other under much more serious circumstances. Kenny gets a fatal muscle disease, and upon seeing him in the hospital bed, Stan crumbles. He walks out of the hospital, unable to handle seeing his friend in such a terrible state. Kyle tries to convince Stan to go back in, given that Kenny needs all the support he can get, but Stan walks out on Kenny, which is just a fully self-serving act. When pressed, Stan gives a rather cynical response.
And what are we supposed to do, huh? Stand in that room and keep making small talk? Make believe like everything's okay? I can't do it!
Stan eventually concedes, but by the time he enthusiastically rushes to the hospital to visit Kenny, it's too late. He's gone. Though Kyle was initially angry at Stan for walking out, he's still the first one to console him after Kenny passes. They come together for the bigger picture here. In Douche and Turd, Stan refuses to vote for a new mascot at first, but eventually gets convinced by Diddy. Kyle praises Stan for voting, but then berates him when Stan votes for the wrong choice, aka not Kyle's choice.
Well, I just figured you'd vote for my guy. Whose fucking friend are you? Puffy?
Both Kyle and Cartman trying to manipulate Stan into voting for their respective candidates pushes Stan away from the idea of voting altogether, which leads him to being completely banished from South Park. Kyle tries one last time to try to get him to vote, given how far the situation escalated, but Kyle's true intentions rear their head once again.
Just vote for Giant Douche. Not voting.
Stan does eventually vote, but there's never any direct friendship makeup here. Probably because this episode wasn't as much Stan versus Kyle as it was Stan versus literally everyone. So it's just kind of implied that Stan coming back pretty much resets everything to normal. But again, we don't get to see them make up after this falling out. Stan briefly turns on Kyle again at the end of Mystery of the Urinal Deuce, revealing that he was the one who pooped in the urinal all along, pulling a gun on Kyle to keep him quiet about it. Though he does back down pretty immediately, so it's doubtful he ever actually intended to use it, but Jesus Christ, pulled a gun on his best friend. Their next blowout comes in Follow That Egg, this time triggered by Stan's ultimate weakness, Wendy. The kids are paired up to look after an egg for a class project, and at this point in the show, Stan and Wendy are broken up and haven't spoken in a while. Of course, out of everyone in the class, Wendy ends up paired with Kyle. Stan takes this pairing pretty hard, watching Kyle do the project with Wendy as new parents. Completely unprompted, Stan calls Kyle to check up on him and Wendy, and he jumps right to insults.
I don't think it's gonna be that hard to keep it from breaking. This whole assignment is stupid. Yeah, well, so is your hat.
This pairing doesn't last long, as Garrison ends up doing an egg swap, matching Bebe with Wendy and Stan with Kyle. Wendy begs Kyle to take care of the egg, and Stan clocks Kyle comforting Wendy, pissing him off even more and causing him to lash out. Stan eventually lets his insecurities out in full, accusing Kyle of purposefully trying to woo Wendy and trying to make him look like a loser. Stan is white-knuckling the project to prove he can take care of an egg, only to have the egg assassinated by a hired gun directed by Garrison, which is not important to get into right now. It's typical Garrison stuff. After the assassination, the two finally talk it out, and Kyle reveals to Stan that he obviously had no interest in Wendy and would never try to date his best friend's ex-girlfriend. And props to Stan, he apologizes to Kyle for being such a bad friend and not trusting him. Kyle too apologizes for not trusting Stan, confessing to having swapped the egg out, fearing Stan would mess things up. They both set off to finish the project, get that A, and for Stan to prove to Wendy that he's not a loser. And there's one last sweet moment as well.
Do you really think my hat is stupid?
As a matter of fact, I think it is the nicest hat I've ever known.
The boys sprint through a barrage of bullets and landmines just to get that A. Despite quite a fallout here, they still make a great team. Stan's jealousy had nothing to do with anything Kyle actually did. Kyle didn't pursue Wendy, didn't ask to be paired with her, and had zero interest in her, but Stan directs his insecurity at Kyle anyway, because Kyle's the safest, closest target. I think he would have been jealous about anyone being paired with Wendy, but it stung extra because Kyle is his best friend, which amplified his projections. Kyle isn't completely innocent here either, hiding the real egg from Stan. Granted, Stan had a bad track record and was acting super weird, but notably, Stan did take good care of the egg this time. The only reason it broke is because it got assassinated. There's no way he could have predicted that. We can't talk about Stan and Kyle fights without diving into Guitar Queero, the most Stan vs. Kyle episode thus far by a mile. This one goes full rockstar biopic and it hits every beat. After Stan and Kyle break 100,000 points on Guitar Hero, they're approached by a manager who tells them they have the potential to hit 1 million. Things look promising at first. Classic rockstar story setup until the manager pulls Stan aside and tells him he wants to pair him with other players and cut Kyle loose. Stan is not into this at first. They always play together and they both chipped in for the console. But Stan eventually discards his honor and plays with a pro named Thad. Shit hits the fan when Kyle catches them in the act and Stan, having fully internalized what his manager told him, offers to just buy Kyle out of his share.
I'm never gonna break 1 million points playing with you. You know that's true. I guess I didn't realize it was just about the points.
Stressed about hitting 1 million, Stan gets offered Heroin Hero by the game store clerk to take the edge off. The pressure makes him irritable and his cocky attitude eventually drives Thad to quit as well. Meanwhile, Kyle fully leans into the fallen rockstar arc, playing Guitar Hero at the bowling alley, getting recognized for his past accomplishments, befriending a bartender named Mick, all very on brand for the trope. The Heroin Hero addiction ends up rotting Stan's brain, maybe a dark foreshadowing for his future substance issues. He can't pull it together in time, completely blowing the arcade showcase, and it takes that humiliation for Stan to finally come to his senses. He reaches out to Kyle to make things right.
Look, I doubt we could break 1 million together anyway. I don't care. I'd just like to play with you again. For the fun of it.
The two make up and vow to break 1 million together, and they actually do it, only to then get roasted by the game itself for having no life. Guitar Queero does a great job of using Stan and Kyle's core traits to drive the friendship's collapse. Sure, it's following a pretty predictable set of biopic tropes, but the two of them fit those roles perfectly. Stan chases personal, logical gain and ends up self-destructing under the pressure and addiction. Kyle gets tossed aside, relegated to solitude, never quite fitting the mold. But at the end of the day, they care about each other enough that Stan can admit he was wrong, and Kyle can forgive him despite being abandoned and betrayed. Similar to Follow That Egg, it is ultimately Stan and his insecurities that led to the downfall of their friendship in this episode. Stan's ego over this string of episodes is another difference that unfolds between Stan and Kyle. Stan not getting exactly what he wants makes him act like a pretty shitty friend to Kyle and others around him. In truth, much of the conflict between the kids in Follow That Egg could have been avoided if Stan wasn't acting out. In Guitar Queero, Stan wants the glory of 1 million points so badly that he's willing to sacrifice his best friend in the process. Kyle is completely the victim this time around. There were a couple other instances that forged a rift between Stan and Kyle that weren't directly related to their friendship, but once again highlighted their differences. Crack Baby Athletic Association has Kyle join Cartman's lucrative Crack Baby basketball business, which is obviously immoral, and Stan silently judges him for being a part of it. Kyle basically uses Stan as a proxy to clear his conscience, knowing full well that what he's doing is messed up, but going through the hoops to justify it. No pun intended. All the while, Stan just says nothing and lets Kyle verbally cope through the guilt. That is until the only gut punch that needed to be said.
You sound like Cartman.
Though Kyle tries to implement measures to make the business a little more morally sound, he gets blocked at every turn. The guilt eats at him so bad that he shows up to Stan's room in the middle of the night, again just trying to justify everything, totally projecting. Kyle attempts to get an orphanage for the crack babies built, though it's largely to ease his own guilt. In the end, the business falls apart. Slash does end up gifting Kyle the orphanage. This is again a very normal show, and Kyle is genuinely excited to see this happen despite not gaining anything from it anymore. Even though Kyle is kind of unhinged this episode, his friendship with Stan doesn't really waver. Kyle still sees Stan as his moral compass, which is exactly why he felt the need to convince him that what he was doing was on the up and up. Stan, meanwhile, knows Kyle knows that he's in the wrong. He just lets him work it out for himself, not even complaining when Kyle wakes him up in the middle of the night. Stan and Kyle's earliest conflicts are almost obligatory, a formality they go through because that's what best friends who compete for anything are supposed to do, and they always make up just as fast. But as the show progresses, the source of conflict shifts from external and trivial to deeply personal. And increasingly, the real threat to their friendship comes more from each other's own flaws rather than outside interference. Stan's ego and insecurity, Kyle's guilt and need for moral validation, the same traits that define who they are individually are exactly what end up driving the wedge between them. No matter how personal or ugly these conflicts get, Stan and Kyle always find their way back to each other. Someone apologizes, someone forgives, and the friendship resets like nothing happened. These early conflicts are proof that no matter how bad it gets, Stan and Kyle's bonds is sturdy enough to absorb it. That is, of course, until it isn't.
That doesn't sound like shit to you?
We talked at length about Kyle having his moments, going down dark thought spirals, but the real shift in their dynamic comes from Stan crashing out. As we've established, Stan is the more logical one, a little less sensitive than Kyle, but importantly, the conflicts we've discussed thus far have shown Stan to be more self-absorbed as well. Stan and Kyle's beefs in Follow That Egg and Guitar Queero stem almost entirely from Stan's bruised ego. I've talked at length about how many characters in South Park are selfish, but their selfishness usually comes in different forms and frequency. Craig is selfish because he's nonchalant and doesn't enjoy conflict. Clyde is selfish because he's lazy and a coward. Cartman is selfish because he's an evil, narcissistic sociopath. Even Kyle's selfishness is because he yearns to be a part of something. Stan's selfishness, in contrast, comes from him being a bit conceited. On some level, we see that Stan gradually gets fed up with whatever's going on in the story, which, in fairness, is very understandable given this show. He's consistently the first one of the main four boys to become exhausted by the nonsense of the town, the nonsense of his father, and even the nonsense of his own friends.
Here's the RG400 Smart Towel, designed with a computer chip inside the terry cloth.
We don't care.
Where are all us kids supposed to go?
Don't care. Ah, Jesus, not again. You just figured out that Slash isn't real? Oh my god.
You Have Zero Friends is the perfect example of this. It highlights how done with everyone's shit Stan is, while simultaneously putting Kyle in yet another situation where he's the odd one out. Everyone becomes obsessed with friends on Facebook, except for Stan, who finds the whole thing to be a waste of time.
Are you guys doing that stupid Facebook stuff again?
The boys make Stan a Facebook page against his will, but he refuses to get involved. Upon hearing there's a kid named Kip Drordy who has no Facebook friends, Kyle adds him out of pity, and unfortunately, being friends with Kip starts costing Kyle his social standing. His existing Facebook friends unfriend him in droves until he's left with only Kip. As much as he protests, Stan gets pestered about Facebook by his father, Wendy, and his father again for not adding his grandmother. It's non-stop. Kyle comes to Stan for help, saying he doesn't have any friends. He's caught in a moral dilemma. The only solution would be to unfriend Kip so he can gain his social standing again, but he feels guilty about doing so, thus he turns to Stan.
I really need a friend right now. Okay, dude, I'm here for you. Okay, so then get on Facebook and fertilize my crops? No.
After much begging from Kyle, Stan reluctantly caves. The Facebook situation only gets worse as well. People will not leave Stan alone about responding on Facebook. A random stranger spits on him. It doesn't end until he gets sucked into Facebook, Tron style, defeats a rogue profile in Yahtzee, and then he can finally drop Facebook altogether. Normal show. On Kyle's end, he finally decides to cut Kip loose and get things back to normal. This episode is interesting because Stan and Kyle are both vying for total opposite goals. Stan sees zero friends at the end of the episode, and it's a relief for him. Stan understands that true friendship shouldn't be commodified, and that ultimately petty numbers and pokes on Facebook mean nothing. Kyle, on the other hand, is searching for community and social validation, as he often does. Even if that community is shallow and digital, Kyle sees one friend and goes into a panic. Stan finding things stupid is a common through line. He's usually the one who gets solo thrown into over-the-top scenarios, like in Stanley's Cup, or even in a fictional story via Woodland Critter Christmas.
Leave me alone!
He knew that only by going to the forest could he...
All right! God!
And of course, he has Randy as a father. His shenanigans alone are bound to paint how Stan approaches the world. In the same way Sheila's aggressive nature causes Kyle to shrink and search for approval, Randy's hijinks likely influence Stan's patience to be much thinner than the other boys. Yes, Stan is still one of the more morally sound characters in South Park, low bar, but still. And yes, Stan has consistently gone above and beyond to save Kyle from harm. At times, it seems like he would move heaven and earth to make sure Kyle was okay. But by the same token, he also lets Kyle down more than anyone else. All the times Kyle was left out of a fad, Stan almost never stood up for him or even stood by him. Their biggest fights thus far were caused by him being kind of a shitty friend and looking out for his own wants first and foremost, even when it came to Kenny dying, even when he knew it was the wrong thing to do. This brings us to what I think is the major turning point in Stan and Kyle's friendship. Season 15's two-parter, You're Getting Old and Asperger's. After this point, there is definitely a subtle change in the way Stan and Kyle operate as friends. After Stan's 10th birthday, everything around him looks and sounds like shit. The music he used to love, the movies he used to enjoy, everything. At first, he actually confides in Kyle about the problem, and Kyle suggests he see a doctor where he is officially diagnosed with being a cynical asshole. Unfortunately, the doctor can do nothing to help him, and Stan complains about every little thing being shitty. It becomes so grating that the boys don't even want to hang out with them anymore, including Kyle. They lie and say they're sick with the flu, only for Stan to find them laughing and hanging out behind his back. Kyle understandably tells Stan that he's becoming a bummer to be around, and that the guys just want to go to the movies without him bringing the vibe down. Stan promises he'll behave, but he just can't help himself.
Oh, come on, people. That's it, Stan. I'm not sitting through a whole movie with you. Dude, wait, I'm sorry.
Stan pleads with the guys to no avail. Kyle tries to explain how he's feeling to Stan, how he's changed, and the final nail in the coffin. Even his best friend just looks and sounds like shit. Brutal. There's this shot where Kyle sees Stan sitting depressed at Stark's Pond and he won't even walk up to him. It's so sad. And in part 2, Stan is in a full-on state of depression. Everything is still shitty. His parents are split up. He has no friends. It is super bleak. Wendy actually approaches Kyle about Stan's behavior. She's really concerned about him as well. But by now, Kyle has given up. He feels like Stan is a black hole and feels himself becoming more depressed just being around him. It's a shame because you can tell that Kyle still cares about Stan here, but has reached a point where he needs to look out for his own well-being. Very similar to him walking away from Stan during the goth phase. Kyle actually gets close with Cartman of all people, working with him at Cartman Burger. Stan has a run-in with this secret society of cynics who reveal that he's actually seeing reality for how it really is, and they give him access to the Matrix so that he can see the world as not shitty again, aka they get him drunk on Jameson. Wasted out of his mind, Stan apologizes to Kyle for everything, but Kyle calls him out on his drinking. He says that things can't just go back to how they used to be, and that he's committed to Cartman Burger now.
Cartman Burger? Seriously? How shitty is that fucking concept? See, there you go again. Look at you, dude. Look what you become.
This all speaks pretty effectively to what we know about Kyle, doesn't it? He is pretty consistently looking for a sense of belonging, as we've established. And here, with Stan becoming a complete drag on his life, he's even willing to find that sense of belonging with Cartman, of all people. It's fascinating to see Kyle sort of swap Stan and Cartman's positions in his life, and for it to actually make sense for the characters in this circumstance. And in the spirit of this, Kyle tries to advise Stan, telling him the only way to keep going is to make a left turn.
Fuck you, Kyle. You're a piece of shit.
Yeah, Stan doesn't take this too well, and as you might expect from a drunk, he regrets it, backtracks, and then does it again.
I love you. You're a piece of shit, though. Fuck you.
It says a lot that Kyle was genuinely willing to go back to Stan after he told him he loves him, despite just having been cursed out. Like, he clearly wants Stan to get better. He wants to have a good relationship with him again, but rightfully won't put up with being mistreated. Stan says, I love you once more, but this time Kyle does not turn back. The fast food managers kidnap Stan to try and acquire the secret to Cartman Burger's taste, and they really rub in what Stan just lost.
We don't hang out anymore.
Oh, right. Like someone would just walk away from a friendship like that.
After the cynics kill the fast food workers, Stan comes to the realization that he doesn't want to rely on alcohol anymore, that he doesn't want things to go back to the way they were either. He fully reaches a state of acceptance, excited for the abundance of possibilities in the future. He fully supports Kyle doing his own thing with Cartman, and he's genuinely excited to move forward. Until, of course, everything gets forcibly reset back to the way things were. Kyle discovers Cartman was putting the burgers in his ass, Randy and Sharon get back together, Stan is left with a deep depression yet again. This time for the opposite reason. A fun, albeit depressing meta take on the reality of sitcoms. But now he's fully embracing the Matrix, aka getting drunk on Jameson, though its effects seem less potent. The first time he drank it, he was in bliss. Now it seems he's drinking it on the regular just to get by, to reach a somewhat stable baseline. We've never seen him do this again since this episode, but who knows, he might just be secretly drinking. So things are back to normal on paper, right? The boys are down to see a movie angry with him. Kyle forgives him, likely because of the hopeful speech he gave during the climax. But the thing is, everything is different now. Stan is different now. The reveal that he's relying on alcohol just to go to the movies with the boys is very, very telling. Tonally, Stan starts carrying himself a little bit differently from this point forward. He always had a bit of cynicism in him, but he starts holding back even less after this, which strains Stan and Kyle's friendship further. In Butterballs, Stan notices how bad the bullying at school has been getting. Initially, his concern presumably comes from a good place, but as soon as he starts getting positive reinforcement, it gets to his head. He volunteers to direct an anti-bullying video with Butters as the main star. Butters is not feeling it, but Stan pompously pressures Butters into sticking with it. Kyle clocks exactly what's going on. He calls Stan out for making the whole thing about him. Stan's movie ends up getting a theatrical release. Kyle makes it very known that he hates the idea. Butters having his face plastered everywhere isn't good for him. It's not what he wants, but Stan takes Kyle's criticisms personally, like a personal attack on his movie. Stan claps back saying his movie is good for people and needs to be seen by everyone, but Kyle will not take it.
If it needs to be seen by everybody, then why don't you put it out on the internet for free? What was the question again?
Of course, it doesn't end well. Stan and Butters get on Dr. Oz, where Butters finally loses it from all the exploitation, completely tanking the movie's image, costing Stan all the goodwill he had accumulated in the process. The episode ends with a now iconic song, but notably, Stan and Kyle never really hashed things out here. A very similar arc happens with Stan in Scars for Applause. It's revealed that Jesus was on performance-enhancing drugs when he died for the world's sins, so people all over the world are removing their What Would Jesus Do bracelets, a parody of the Lance Armstrong controversy and his Live Strong bracelets, which I'm realizing some of you may be too young to remember. What was the name of that other episode again? You're getting old? But Stan is the only one who keeps his bracelet on, which sends him through a media frenzy. Even though people still don't like Jesus, they start to respect Stan for sticking true to who he is and start rocking new Stan Ground bracelets instead. After this, it is a whirlwind. He's affecting world politics, gets his own Nike commercial, he becomes a figure of inspiration. That is until a news crew alleges that he actually did remove his bracelet, but simply superglued it back together later. Stan confidently allows them to check his bracelet for superglue and tears, and turns out he did cut it off. Bold move, Stan. Even though he was caught yellow-wristed, he stands his ground and insists he didn't cut it off, despite how obvious it is that he's lying. Kyle, being the best friend he is, checks in on Stan, urging him to just come clean with the lie. Stan never admits it to Kyle, just deflection after deflection. Kyle is a really good friend here. He's fully condoning Stan take accountability for his lie, but also being supportive while doing so. He wants what's best for him, but Stan does not waver.
You really think I went through all that trouble, lying about my wristband and claiming to be something I wasn't? For what, Kyle? For what?
Stan and Jesus team up to try to win public favor again under the guise of trying to make it about the issues they stood for, all while vehemently denying the proven allegations. They make a new cause, or SCAWS, for farmers in Belarus. To Stan's credit, he does seem genuinely happy to help people without the credit at first, but Butters feeds his ego again, saying there are rumors that Stan lied on purpose to bring more attention to Belarus rather than himself. He doesn't confirm nor deny the rumor, but it's clear he feels satisfied with the good publicity.
People are saying that?
And of course, Kyle does not let him get away with it, though.
Heidi Turner says you asked her to borrow superglue last week. Are you still on that, dude?
Stan and Kyle don't outright fight here, and all is good by the end of the episode, but it's worth noting that much like Butterballs, Kyle sees right through Stan's performative bullshit. Kyle shows true friendship here, not letting Stan's ego trip slide. Stan ends up having to do the same thing for Kyle in the episode Ginger Cow. Cartman makes the titular Ginger Cow, which accidentally matches a prophecy that causes peace in the Middle East. Kyle is the only one who knows Cartman is lying, so Cartman forces Kyle to do his bidding, lest he expose the truth. So now Kyle has to eat Cartman's farts in order to maintain peace in the Middle East. Normal show. Stan shows his true potential of being a ride or die here, where he earnestly tries to understand why Kyle likes Cartman's farts, and even asks if he should try them for himself. Man, they may have been through a lot, but that is a true bro right there. In the process, Kyle gets a vision telling him how awesome he is for a sacrifice and decides to act like a self-righteous monk. Obviously, Stan doesn't understand the full extent of what's going on, but much much like Kyle did for Stan, Stan does not let Kyle get away with acting like a dick. Though given the strange circumstances of this instance, he suspects something is up and decides to look deeper into the truth, which inadvertently leads everything to go back to normal in the end. They definitely fumbled that one. Ginger Cow is the perfect episode to crystallize the difference between Stan and Kyle's respective crash outs and pretentious episodes. Both often involve an ego trip, both often involve one of them acting insufferable while the other has to talk them down, but the source of these spirals is where they diverge completely. Kyle's crash outs are existential. They're about meaning, belonging, being part of something bigger than himself. In Ginger Cow, Kyle starts acting like a self-righteous monk over a sacrifice that literally no one else even knows about other than Cartman. He's not gaining status or material reward. The ego boost is entirely internal, built on his own belief that he's secretly saving humanity. Compare that to Crack Baby Athletic Association, where Kyle's spiral is driven by guilt over being part of something exploitative, but he sticks with it anyway. Partially for the material rewards, but it also makes him feel like he belongs to a community. A fucked up community, but community nonetheless. Go all the way back to Tooth Fairy's tats or Biggest Douche in the Universe, and it's the same root cause. It's an inward, almost spiritual kind of crisis with him most of the time. Stan's crash outs tend to run the opposite direction. They're ego-driven, jaded, and more superficial. They're about status and recognition. Butterballs and Skaws for Applause are the clearest examples. Stan gets a taste of public praise, money, clout, and that validation completely warps his judgment to the point where he'll double down on a lie rather than lose the spotlight. It's material. It's about the Nike deal, the movie premiere, the bracelet, even Guitar Queero and Follow That Egg fit this mold. He wanted the fame, the points, the girl, and throw Wendy in the mix. Forget about it. She's literally been one of his primary motivators as a character since the pilot. And when that grandeur gets stripped away, Stan may just find himself in a depression. Total shutdown. The moments Stan has given up on Kyle come from Kyle being so delusional and in his own head that Stan accepts he'll never get through to him, no matter how sound or logical his arguments are, or when Kyle doesn't fit in and would ultimately harm his own reputation. On the contrary, the moments Kyle has given up on Stan come from Stan being so miserable or intolerable to be around that Kyle refuses to let himself get pulled into Stan's self-destruction. Kyle spirals when he's disconnected from community and deeper meaning. Stan spirals when his ego gets either too inflated or too deflated. This would go on to partially fuel their feuds moving forward.
There's nothing in South Park for me, Kyle.
Our next rift between Stan and Kyle comes in the Black Friday trilogy. Initially, the boys band together to try to be the first to the mall on Black Friday, before splitting into Team PS4 and Team Xbox One. Stan and Kyle find themselves on opposite sides here in dramatic fashion. Stan sides with the PS4 and Kyle with Xbox One.
Just had your head so set because that's how Xbox people are.
I love how earnestly heartbroken Stan is here to have to call Kyle an Xbox person, but even after this display, Kyle is still upset to find himself and Stan on opposite sides of the console wars, still hoping deep down he can get through to Stan and convince him to join Xbox. After Sony announces the Black Friday Bundaroo, Kyle has yet another existential crisis.
You know the Xbox is still better, right?
Yeah, but why can't Xbox automatically let you pre-order Metal Gear Solid 5?
Obviously, part of the joke here is that this story is playing out like a Game of Thrones episode, so it is just jam-packed with back and forth backstabbing and plans of betrayal and sabotage. All the while, Kyle and Stan try desperately to convince one another to switch sides. Kyle makes one last-ditch effort, even saying that Stan was the one who started the whole thing, and in reality, you could argue that it was Craig that started the war, not Stan. But it says a lot that Kyle is willing to be so petty with Stan here. Regardless, Stan does not budge. Eventually, due to the majesty of Princess Kenny, Team Xbox ends up backed into a corner, and Kyle decides it's time to play dirty. He comes with a plan for Team Xbox to act like they're giving up and switching sides to Sony, with Kyle trying to appeal to his friendship with Stan in the process. He swears to Stan's face that he's okay with gaming on PlayStation and will never talk about the Xbox being better again, only for him to double-cross him. The true plan is for everyone to rent out the Red Robin, lock the PlayStation army inside, and storm the mall for Xboxes. You would think a plan like this would come from Cartman, but no, it was Kyle of all people. Now, it is worth noting that Cartman did plant the idea in Kyle's head of Stan's dad operating on the inside, so Kyle probably felt like this kind of betrayal was fair game, but I honestly don't think the old Kyle would have done this. Even when they were supposedly fighting to the death, Kyle was much more honorable and respectful with Stan than he is here. I think it's fair to say after years of friction and frankly backstabbing on behalf of Stan, Kyle's view of his best friend has altered at least somewhat by this point in the show's run. Pointedly, Stan and Kyle are still very much framed as besties here, hence the heaviness of their conflict, but this is the first first time we see Kyle go out of his way to do Stan dirty on purpose. When Stan finds out, he immediately thinks about Kyle.
Did Kyle know about this? Kyle thought of it.
Cartman frames Stan and gets him grounded, a line that Kyle was not even willing to cross, and in classic Kyle fashion, he tries to justify his actions with altruism, claiming that he feels Xbox is genuinely what's best for everyone. Stan says something here that feels illuminating.
You completely betrayed the last bit of friendship we still had.
Ouch. This could be read a couple of ways. Either he was referring to the console wars splitting them apart, or it was a genuine reflection on all the squabbles they'd gotten into over the years, an acknowledgement of them drifting from each other. Kyle tries to defend himself, bringing up the fact that Stan's dad was working at the mall, hence why he did what he did, but Stan brings up a great point, that Kyle really could have just asked him about it. Sure, Cartman manipulated Kyle, but the fact that Cartman was able to manipulate Kyle as opposed to Kyle going to his best friend to talk with him and get his side of the story, it speaks volumes. Stan says he's never playing Call of Duty with Kyle again and yells at him to go. Kyle does fight to make things right. He double crosses Cartman in favor of Team PlayStation, vowing to get Stan his own console so they can play together again, but Stan sneaks out and interrupts the whole thing, calling out how marketing and commercialism took a toll on everybody's friendship, so he makes Sony and Microsoft fight it out for themselves, literally. Xbox wins, the boys play again, and it seems Kyle and Stan are back to being best friends. This trilogy leads into Stick of Truth, where Stan is Kyle's loyal knight. This didn't do permanent damage to the friendship, rather it brought to the surface something that's been bubbling for a while now. Stan and Kyle have real doubts in each other. The trust has eroded enough that Kyle can be swayed by Cartman. All the betrayal, the accusations, the name calling, it's hard to picture something this dramatic happening with those two in the early days of the show. Speaking of the early days, in a bit of meta commentary, everyone starts getting sick of Kyle's speeches in the episode Where My Country Gone. This harkens back to the old I learned something today speeches that used to happen all the time, bluntly stating the moral of the episode. These speeches were pretty evenly split between Stan and Kyle for a while, but started to become more of a Kyle thing over time. They don't really do this tradition anymore, but it's worth noting how different Stan and Kyle are in the modern era, that the morally superior one is now firmly Kyle, not Stan.
I know you like giving speeches and stuff, but not everything is black and white.
This is different from the times Kyle's been singled out for missing a fad. In those instances, Stan is usually highlighted more, either as the friend trying to talk Kyle off the ledge, or as a conduit that enhances the betrayal, given how close they are. It hurt more when Stan wasn't sticking up for Kyle, but here, Stan falls in line with everyone else. There's no singling out of Stan's take compared to the rest of the boys. Everyone, as a unit, is just not feeling Kyle's speeches. The very same kinds of speeches Stan used to give almost as often, mind you.
Because if we let this kind of...
Dude, unbelievable.
Kyle is all on his own here. This wedge gets larger towards the end of season 19. As the boys are trying to uncover the truth about PC Principal, Stan and Kyle are the first to become suspicious of each other.
Why are you looking at me?
Why are you looking at me?
It gets to the point where Stan even conspires with the other boys, letting them in on his suspicions of Kyle trying to actively distract them from the truth. Kyle claps back, noting that Stan's dad was buddy-buddy with PC Principal in the first place, so it must be Stan that's involved. It heats up a lot before the two actually start fist fighting. This time, it's a real fight, not that half-assed shit from back in season 2. No hesitation, just pure anger and resentment from both of them. How far our boys have fallen. The whole conspiracy starts to unravel. It's a lot to get into for this video, but in short, Kyle ends up getting tricked by Leslie, still adamant that Randy is behind everything, while Stan's suspicions seem validated by Kyle teaming up with Leslie.
You son of a bitch, Stan! How could you have sided with the enemy?
Fuck you, Kyle, you're the enemy.
Now obviously, in this scenario, everyone's pointing guns at each other, everyone is paranoid, and eventually everyone makes up with the power of guns. I mean, communication. But Stan and Kyle were both so quick to distrust each other this time around. They didn't show that same distrust towards Kenny or Butters or even Cartman. Similarly, in Snow Day, Kyle suspects Stan of casting a level 10 endless winter spell on South Park to cause the massive storm. He claims Stan was acting strange all week and insisting his version of the game's rules were better. Stan does end up being influenced by Mr. Hankey's dark matter, which exacerbated his negative qualities, though Stan's reputation for this kind of behavior goes beyond his use of dark matter, at least in Kenny's mind.
Stan's been kind of an asshole lately. That's just good.
But it's Kyle that is more frustrated with Stan than the other boys.
You don't even know what power-ups go with what abilities.
And that's why you turned into a total dick?
Oh, I'm a dick because I stood up for what I believe in.
Stan, in fact, didn't cause the snowstorm. So here we have yet another case of Kyle mistrusting Stan, understandably, but also assuming the absolute worst of him and accusing Stan of something he had no part in.
Do you really think I would purposely start a storm that's killing people and shutting down the whole town?
The way you've been acting lately, yes.
Stan was being a pompous dick, to be fair. He was fully antagonistic, but he was also influenced by the dark matter. Kyle never thought that there could be any other factors at play in Stan's behavior because, like Kenny said, that's just Stan, dude. At this point, Kyle has been betrayed so many times by Stan, and Stan simultaneously has become harder to be around. It's understandable that Kyle keeps jumping to conclusions, even when those assumptions are completely false. The fractures in Stan and Kyle's friendship have started being about trust itself. Stan and Kyle's relationship is cracking because neither of them extends the other the benefit of the doubt like they used to. This fundamental change in the way Stan and Kyle see each other goes beyond them no longer being besties. Some of it boils down to the entire group slowly fizzling, and the root cause is more structural.
I know it's hard to see right now, but things will go back to normal.
Much of the fandom has expressed for years that South Park just doesn't hit like it used to. A major factor for that is South Park doesn't tell stories in the same way, and that fact has naturally trickled down into character dynamics as well. This is a larger conversation that probably deserves its own video, but as for the big picture, South Park isn't quite as character-driven as it used to be. It's much more focused on whatever hot-button issue is on everyone's mind each week. Of course, South Park has always satirized current events. That is nothing new, but the approach has changed a little bit. For one, when the show did tackle pop culture or recent goings-on, the boys were almost always at the center of the topic that was being satirized. These days, the boys are more of a backdrop for the satire than the other way around. They're involved, of course, but there's a lot more happening around them. The adults are more prominent, and the people involved in each topic are also more important. For example, we got a whole season of Trump cabinet stuff where the boys took a back seat, and while using Trump as a stand-in for Saddam was brilliant, it felt like the focus was much more on the administration itself than the kids interacting with it directly a lot of the time. And when the kids were involved, they were often split up for one reason or another. Two, even with South Park's long history of topic-based episodes, there also used to be a healthy balance of episodes that focused on just the characters interspersed with those current event stories. Aspen, Good Times with Weapons, Scott Tenorman Must Die. Episodes like these focus squarely on the boys without any need for bigger social commentary. These kinds of standalone episodes are borderline non-existent these days, meaning opportunities for Stan and Kyle's friendship to even show up organically the way it once did are scarce. And three, the show itself started leaning more into serialization than ever before. Older seasons did dabble in serialization, continuity was upheld with all the Garrison changes, Kenny dying for a bit, etc., but the episodes themselves could be watched in a vacuum for the most part. However, for a good chunk of the past decade or so, South Park has been taking the approach of each episode leading into the next, often ending on cliffhangers until finally coming together for a big finale. Since the topics themselves have been more focused on the adults and other characters, this means we're following the journey of, say, Gerald for a whole season, leaving less room for a Butters Cartman misadventure or a Stan and Kyle team up for the entire run. They're just not as relevant to the A-plot sometimes. These changes have been metatextualized within South Park. In Unfulfilled, Cartman blatantly calls out how the boys aren't as close as they used to be.
Whatever happened to us? What do you mean?
It used to always be the four of us. Always.
This was back in season 22, and honestly, not much has really changed. In fact, their broship would only go to be tested even more in the COVID specials. During the vaccination special, Kenny expresses that he's worried about the strain, no pun intended, the pandemic put on their friendship. Cartman and Kenny plan a prank on Miss Nelson, placing ketchup on her chair to make it look like she got her period. Given the stress of the pandemic, this causes her to storm out of class, and Stan and Kyle are understandably pissed at Cartman and Kenny, fearing this might lead to them going back to remote learning. But nope, it's worse. Garrison is back. Everyone at school hates the boys for the prank, furthering their fracture, exacerbated by the fact that Cartman told everyone that all four of them pulled the prank, not just Cartman and Kenny. Cartman and Kyle argue, and Kyle notably turns to Stan to come to their defense.
Are you just gonna stand there and listen to this crap?
I don't even know what to do. If you ask me, this whole pandemic has been a giant waste of time.
So here we have Kyle bidding for support from Stan, and Stan shutting down with a cynical remark, opting out entirely. Like, yeah, obviously the pandemic was horrible, but Stan is allowing it to cloud his entire view on his friends here. Things escalate when Kyle lashes out.
Nobody cares about your stupid bro ships.
You can tell that Kyle immediately regrets this after Kenny walks off sobbing. Even Cartman is disappointed. The boys all agree to counseling, but Mr. Mackey is at his limit as well. In an effort to get Mrs. Nelson back, the boys venture off to try and get the vaccine for her and the other teachers, and they manage to pull it off, but they can't stop bickering the entire time. Kyle keeps trying to get Stan to call Cartman out on his usual Cartman bullshit.
Will you please say something to him?
What the hell did I do?
It's like they're an old married couple. The whole town gets wind that the boys have vaccinations, and as you might expect, Cartman tries to capitalize, while Kyle is adamant they stick to the plan to give it to the teachers, looking to Stan for backup again. Because historically, of course, Stan and Kyle are the ones that are on the same page. Always the two moral compasses of the group, but not anymore. Stan has more selfish motivations. He's sick of COVID and wants to just go back to normal, so he suggests they just take the vaccines themselves. The tables turn when Kyle gets pressured by his parents to give them the vaccine, and Kyle once again betrays his friends for his perceived altruistic reasons, and Stan catches him in the act.
I can't believe that you would lie to me. That you would hide shit from me.
Kenny walks in on this confrontation, and they sort of humor him as Kenny is desperate for the boys' friendship to last, but it's clear to the others that they really are drifting apart. Eventually, the truth comes out.
Look, let's just face it, you guys. We don't trust each other and we don't like each other.
Stan, Kyle, and Cartman treat Kenny like their son here, having him watch Madagascar 3 on his iPad while they essentially talk about getting divorced and how they're going to split custody. By the end of the special, they all wish each other the best and go their separate ways. This split would have pretty serious ramifications. Stan grows up to be a miserable alcoholic, a grim callback to his state at the end of Asperger's. He gets a call from Kyle and it's kind of heartbreaking. The whole conversation is stilted and awkward. They don't sound like old friends at all, just old classmates. Kyle urges Stan to come back to South Park, and Stan insists that there is nothing there for him anymore. Safe to say, in this future, they are very much not friends. Stan does go back after learning of Kenny's passing. He and Kyle meet for lunch, and you can tell Stan has a lot of buried emotions about the whole thing. Nevertheless, he powers through, and we learn that they haven't seen each other since they were 9, so present-day South Park, barring sliding timescale shenanigans, of course. Come back to this video in like 40 years, Matt and Trey will still be running the show in their 90s, and the boys will maybe hit 5th grade by then. Kyle and Stan are in really interesting places here. Stan lies about being happy to not let on how rough his life actually is. Kyle is still kind of figuring himself out even now. He's the first to bring up everything that went down when they were kids and tries to extend the olive branch, and Stan brutally interrupts him.
Put that aside.
Dude, Kyle, I'm just here for Kenny.
After everything, it still feels like Kyle would be open to a better friendship with Stan, but Stan stonewalls him off the bat, cold and straight to the point. Cynical 50-year-old Stan just wants to show up for the funeral and then dip. No catching up with old friends, no uncovering any mysteries, and certainly no catchphrases.
Oh my God, they killed Kenny.
I'm just here for the funeral.
I love that twice now that catchphrase not being finished has been emblematic of the state of their friendship. Stan and Kyle's contrasting traits are on full display in this future. Stan is pessimistic and irritated by everything.
So what do you want to do, Kyle? Go on some bullshit adventure like when we were kids?
Meanwhile, Kyle is sentimental and trying to do the right thing. We see him wistfully looking back at an old photo of the gang, and in a meta way, it's kind of sad. Not just within the narrative of these specials, but for the audience. It really does feel like the boys have been drifting apart for a long time due to the factors I mentioned earlier, especially for longtime fans. The mystery of Kenny's death does get Stan's attention, which forces him to swallow his pride and reach back out to Kyle for another classic team up. At Kenny's wake, they're at the same table, but sitting awkwardly, looking away from each other. At the funeral, Scott Malkinson delivers a speech about forgiveness, about being the best people we can and reaching out to our loved ones, our friends, our family. This brings up all of Stan's repressed insecurities about the way things went down. He crashes out and accuses Kyle of putting Malkinson up to the speech just to guilt trip him. You know, because Kyle loves sappy speeches. Stan feels like everyone is judging him, clearly projecting how unsatisfied he is with his own life onto Kyle and literally everyone else in South Park. When the town gets quarantined, Cartman assumes Stan is staying with Kyle, but no, Stan would rather stay crammed in the school gym than with Kyle. When the gang goes to retrieve the flash drive from Kenny's body, Stan laments that he always had to fix everything when they were kids. We get another spiritual callback to "you're getting old" here.
You did not fucking fix everything. You just started acting like everyone else was stupid.
Because they were acting acting stupid?
They're of course referring to the pandemic here, but it's interesting just how much that two-parter changed the dynamic. Remember, Stan was drinking in order to stop seeing the world as shitty. It's apparent that he never really stopped seeing the world that way and continues to cope with drinking. This is partially why Kyle was trying to get Stan to defend him so much in the vaccination special, because, well, that's what the old Stan would have done. But the pandemic just made Stan check out because, well, it was shitty. The montage we get from Stan's point of view during the pandemic is very reminiscent of his depression scene in You're Getting Old, complete with a birthday and everything. And ultimately, the pandemic brought out the shittiness in everyone. Kyle couldn't stay friends with Stan while he was in the throes of his cynicism, so it checks out that the pandemic caused a bit of a relapse in Stan that would naturally be a point of contention for him and Kyle.
Dude, what are you doing? This isn't gonna help.
Trust me, Kyle, it helps.
Kenny's big secret is that he wanted to go back in time to fix the broship. So it was inadvertently Stan, Kyle, and Cartman's bickering that killed Kenny. Bastards. Everyone admits they were wrong and they rally together to fix everything. The boys come together to change the course of the timeline, and things take a much better turn in the good future. The broship is saved, and in the new future, Stan and Kyle are still close. Kyle's kids even call Stan Uncle Stan. All seems right in the world. Well, Cartman gets the short end of the stick, but that's a whole different thing. The erosion of Stan and Kyle's friendship thus far has been a byproduct of how the show itself changed just as much as it's been a byproduct of specific character choices. As South Park drifted from character-driven standalones towards serialized topic-first storytelling, Stan and Kyle simply stopped getting the space to just be best friends without a bigger story getting in the way. The show eventually turned the format shift into the plot itself, with the COVID specials using the pandemic as a pressure test that exposes just how much distance had built between them and just how much work it takes to close it back up. And part of that interpersonal work comes from dealing with the most controversial status quo change the show has ever seen, and will undoubtedly test Stan and Kyle's integrity. Interestingly, we actually can't really discuss Stan and Kyle's friendship entirely without talking about Tolkien Black, a character who's been getting quite a bit more of a spotlight lately. This primarily comes from Stan and his family moving outside of the main part of South Park to live on Tegrity Farms as Randy sold and grew his own weed. Tolkien and his family soon followed suit with their own weed business, Credigree Weed, and this move facilitated two things. One, it gave Stan and Kyle less time out of school to spend together, and two, it put Tolkien front and center in Stan's world, since he was the only kid nearby that Stan could actually spend one-on-one time with. Stan and Tolkien team up in the Streaming Wars specials, building mini boats for all these streaming services in town. But in Cupid Ye, it's ironically Kyle who becomes besties with Tolkien. The two start making TikToks together, and the whole school loves them. Stan is visibly jealous of their new friendship. Tolkien stole his best friend and his girl? That's rough, buddy. Stan tries to play it off like he's not bothered, but it is clear that it gets to him. Cartman, or Cupid Ye, tries to break up Kyle and Tolkien so that Stan and Kyle can be best friends again. And after Cupid Ye spirals out of control, Stan admits to Tolkien that he's been jealous of their TikToks, and the three of them work things out. In spring break, Stan asks if he can invite the guys over to play Warhammer 40k, and when Randy confirms, he runs off excitedly to call Tolkien. Tolkien is the closest option, sure, but it's telling that Tolkien counts as the guys now, especially considering he's the only one who actually shows up. Stan and Tolkien end up playing Warhammer the entire break, even in the middle of Randy's toxic manosphere tirades and obnoxious partying. It would be easy to crown Tolkien as Stan's new best friend, or even Kyle's given Cupid Ye, but I don't think he ever quite reaches that level. He's closer to both of them than before, sure, but calling him the new best friend for either one would be overselling it. And with Stan moving back into his old house, it'll be interesting to see if Matt and Trey use this as an opportunity to give us more Stan and Kyle team-ups again. What's telling is that even the show's efforts to repair Stan and Kyle's friendship come with a catch. The same structural shifts that pulled them apart haven't gone away just because one crisis got resolved. The COVID specials prove the two of them can still find their way back to each other when it counts, and ultimately will by the 40-year mark, excluding any changes in the timeline. But the show doesn't reward that with a return to the old status quo in the present day. Instead, it introduces Tolkien as evidence of how much room has opened up in Stan and Kyle's orbit, now that proximity, screen time, and plot relevance could no longer be assumed. The two can still recognize the value in one another, but whether they can consistently choose each other in the show that no longer defaults to putting them together is a different question.
They've been through everything together.
Inseparable.
So, to answer the question, are Stan and Kyle still best friends? Well, yeah, sort of, but it's complicated. In the past, we could see their friendship through their actions, how far they would go to be there for each other, to lift one another up. There was a classic format where Stan and Kyle teamed up after Kenny dies, and Cartman does the B-plot. But as the series progressed, their friendship has been told more than it's been shown. Them being best buds is more implied due to their history, rather than actually demonstrated in new episodes of the show. On top of that, their friendship stopped being a character trait and started being a plot device, a way to raise the stakes whenever the two of them ended up on opposite sides, and by and large, the episodes built around their rivalry now outnumber the ones built around their friendship. It's comforting to know things work out for them eventually, but as it stands right now, in the present day, they're just not as close as they used to be. And that's part of what makes this whole thing so interesting. Most long-running animated sitcoms are allergic to change. The status quo is sacred. Nobody's relationship is allowed to actually move. South Park doesn't really play by that rule. Not fully. It lets things stick. It lets characters evolve and keeps writing around whatever they become. People grow up, drift, come back around, drift again. Stan and Kyle just happen to be doing it in a cartoon that's been running long enough to actually show the whole arc. The falling out and the growing back together. That's a rare thing for a 30-year-old show. Do they always stick the landing? Maybe not, but I respect the big swings the show tries to take in this regard. For Stan and Kyle, right now, that means more bickering, less benefit of the doubt, more fights that don't fully resolve, but it also means the door's still open. And if the show ever decides to walk them back through it, it'll actually mean something, because unlike most sitcom friendships, theirs was allowed to fall apart in the first place. Stan and Kyle's friendship thus far has been proving over and over that two people can grow apart, hurt each other, stop recognizing who the other person's become, and still choose to come back. Anyone can be best friends when nothing ever tests it. And as we've seen, Stan and Kyle have given up on each other more than once, but they always come back. They keep earning it, even when hanging on by a thread. Folks, thanks so much for tuning into another South Park video. This one was actually written by Mykal Williams, who has been helping me out with the channel for a while now. His work is great. This is an excellent script from Mykal. Please check out his other work on his channel Go Play Hero, and stay tuned for more. Peace.
I stay mellow watching Johnny two cellos. He talks cartoons, he's a really cool fellow. He keeps you posted on adult cartoons. If that's what you're into, then grab a spoon and a very big bowl of your favorite cereal. Feels like Saturday morning cartoon material. Johnny two cellos, watch him on YouTube. Now enjoy this groove and bust a move.